Montana Territory, December 1879. Frost clung to the windows of Silverpine's only saloon as winter's grip tightened around the small frontier town. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the rugged landscape in pristine white. Inside, Garrett McAllister nursed a whiskey, his 25-year-old frame hunched against the bar as if weathering an invisible storm. The saloon buzzed with the usual evening crowd, miners, cowboys, and the occasional drifter seeking refuge from the bitter cold. Garrett believed the frontier was no place for permanence. 6 years working cattle had taught him that a man survived by keeping his roots shallow and his attachments few. The West took more than it gave, and he'd seen good men lose everything to its harsh indifference: land, livestock, loved ones. Better to ride alone and answer to no one but himself and the changing seasons. "Another," he said, sliding his empty glass toward the barkeep. His calloused hands betrayed his profession, though he carried himself with the easy confidence of youth rather than the weathered stoop of older ranch hands. Despite the harsh life, his features remained handsome, strong jawline softened by light stubble, clear blue eyes sharp with intelligence, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. The saloon doors swung open, bringing a gust of frigid air and the town's sheriff, a graying man named Ellis who nodded at Garrett before claiming the stool beside him. "McAllister, surprised to see you in town. Thought Hampton had you running cattle down to the southern pastures." Garrett nodded, finished early, figured I'd get supplies before heading back to the ranch. What he didn't mention was the hollow feeling that had settled in his chest lately, a restlessness he couldn't name. Hampton's Double Circle Ranch had been good to him, offering steady work and fair pay, but something about another Christmas approaching with nothing but a bunkhouse full of snoring cowboys for company left him unsettled. "Well, you picked quite the night to come to town," Ellis said, accepting a coffee from the barkeep. "Stage is running late, probably the weather." Garrett merely grunted in response. The stagecoach held no interest for him. Just another rotation of strangers passing through, drummers selling their wares, maybe a mail-order bride or two heading to distant homesteads. None of it concerned a ranch hand with no roots and no plans beyond the next season. The doors burst open again, this time revealing a young woman who stumbled in as if pushed by the wind itself. She wore a blue traveling dress beneath a woolen coat that had seen better days, both items dusted with snow. Her honey-blonde hair escaped from beneath her bonnet in damp tendrils, framing a face flushed with cold but undeniably beautiful. The saloon fell momentarily silent. Women were scarce in Silverpine, and respectable ones in the saloon rarer still. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest like a shield, her wide hazel eyes darting around the room before settling on the barkeep. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cultured but trembling slightly. "The stagecoach has broken an axle just outside of town. The driver said we would be delayed until morning. Is there a hotel nearby?" Before the barkeep could answer, the sheriff stood. "Miss Widow Cooper runs a boarding house 2 streets over. It's respectable and clean, though likely full with Christmas approaching." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you, sir. I would be most grateful for directions." Something about her demeanor caught Garrett's attention. The way she kept glancing toward the door, the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands despite her composed words. He recognized the look of someone ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. Sheriff Ellis must have noticed too. "Miss, if you don't mind my asking, are you traveling alone?" Her hesitation was brief but telling. "Yes, I'm meeting family in Helena for Christmas." The lie was transparent enough that Garrett found himself straightening on his stool, suddenly alert. The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I see. Well, it's not safe for a young woman to be wandering the streets after dark, especially in this weather. McAllister here can escort you to Mrs. Cooper's." Garrett opened his mouth to protest, but the sheriff gave him a pointed look. With a sigh, he drained his whiskey and stood, reaching for his coat and hat. "It would be my pleasure, miss." "Pearson," she supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Willow Pearson. And truly, I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," Garrett said, though he'd rather have finished his drink in peace. "I was heading that way regardless." Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, muffling the sounds of the small town. Garrett adjusted his hat and offered to carry her bag, which she surrendered reluctantly. They walked in silence for several paces before he spoke. "Whoever you're running from, Miss Pearson, they won't find you easily in this weather." She stopped abruptly, her face pale in the glow of a nearby lantern. I beg your pardon. No need to pretend with me, he said, keeping his voice low. I recognize fear when I see it, been around enough spooked horses to know the signs in people too. For a moment he thought she might deny it or perhaps slap him for his presumption. Instead, her shoulders slumped slightly. Is it that obvious? She whispered. Only to someone who's looking, he replied. Most folks in there are too concerned with their own troubles to notice yours. She hesitated, then continued walking. My father, she finally said. I'm 19 years old and he arranged a marriage for me to a business associate 3 times my age. The wedding was to be Christmas Day. Her voice hardened. I refused. And he didn't take kindly to that, I imagine. No. She touched her wrist absently and Garrett noticed a faint bruise there. He said I had no choice, so I took what money I had saved and left Philadelphia 3 days ago. I've been traveling west ever since. Garrett frowned. Montana's a long way from Philadelphia, Miss Pearson. That was rather the point, Mr. McAllister. Despite himself, Garrett smiled. There was spine beneath that genteel exterior. Fair enough. But what do you plan to do once you reach Helena? She lifted her chin. I'll find work. I'm educated. I can teach or perhaps work as a clerk or governess. He didn't have the heart to tell her how few positions existed for a young, unmarried woman in frontier towns, especially one with Eastern refinement, and he suspected little practical experience. Before he could respond, they reached the boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building with warm light spilling from its windows. Mrs. Cooper answered the door, a plump woman with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. My goodness, out in this weather, come in before you catch your death. After a brief exchange, Mrs. Cooper confirmed she had 1 room available. Just cleaned it this morning after Mr. Hawkins moved on to Bozeman. Willow paid for 2 nights, though Garrett noted the careful way she counted out her coins. As Mrs. Cooper went to prepare the room, Willow turned to Garrett. Thank you for your escort, Mr. McAllister. I appreciate your discretion as well. He handed her the carpetbag. It's not my business to interfere in others' affairs, Miss Pearson. Even so, not everyone would have been so kind. Something about the gratitude in her eyes made him uncomfortable. He wasn't accustomed to being thanked for basic decency. Get some rest. Town's small but decent enough. Sheriff Ellis keeps good order. She nodded and he tipped his hat before turning to leave. At the door he paused. Miss Pearson, the stagecoach to Helena won't run again until after Christmas. Weather's too unpredictable this time of year. Her face fell. Oh, I see. He shouldn't care. It wasn't his concern what happened to a runaway Eastern girl with unrealistic expectations. But something, perhaps the approaching holiday, or maybe the echo of his own younger self fleeing a situation he couldn't control, made him add, Hampton's ranch is looking for help in the main house. Cook's overwhelmed with the holiday preparations. Might be worth asking, at least until the stage runs again. Hope flickered in her eyes. Where would I find this ranch? I'm heading back at first light. Could show you the way if you're interested. I would be, very much so. Garrett nodded once, already regretting his impulsive offer. I'll call for you at 7. Outside in the swirling snow, he paused to light a cigarette, watching the smoke disappear into the white darkness. What was he doing, involving himself with a woman clearly running from trouble? The frontier taught hard lessons about minding your own business and keeping complications at arm's length. Yet something about Willow Pearson's determined vulnerability had pierced his carefully maintained distance. Just until the stage runs again, he told himself, just a simple act of Christmas charity, nothing more. But as he made his way back to the small room he'd rented for the night, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that his life had somehow shifted course, like a river diverted by a fallen tree, small at first, but with consequences that would reveal themselves only with time. Morning arrived crisp and clear, the storm having passed overnight to leave a pristine blanket of white over the town. Garrett waited outside the boarding house at precisely 7, his horse saddled, and a second mount borrowed from the livery stable beside him. When Willow emerged, he was momentarily taken aback by her transformation. Gone was the travel-worn young lady from the previous evening. In her place stood a woman who had clearly adapted to her circumstances. She'd exchanged her fine traveling dress for a simpler skirt and shirtwaist, her honey-blonde hair neatly braided and tucked beneath a practical bonnet. The carpetbag had been supplemented by a small trunk that Mrs. Cooper's son helped carry out. Good morning, Mr. McAllister, she said, her voice steadier than the night before. Rest had restored some color to her cheeks, highlighting the dusting of freckles across her nose. Miss Pearson, he nodded, taking in her changed appearance. I see you came prepared for a change in circumstances. A slight smile touched her lips. I may have been desperate, but I wasn't entirely foolish. I knew the West would require adjustments. He helped her mount the spare horse, noting with approval that she seemed comfortable in the saddle. You've ridden before. My father believed every proper young lady should have basic equestrian skills, though I suspect his idea of proper and mine have diverged considerably. There was a flash of something in her eyes, pain perhaps, or regret, before she straightened her shoulders. How far is this ranch? About 2 hours' ride. Hampton's double circle is the largest spread in the county. Owner's a fair man, if somewhat particular about how things are done. They rode in companionable silence for a time, Willow taking in the vast Montana landscape with wide eyes. The snow-covered plains stretched toward distant mountains, broken only by stands of pine and the occasional homestead. It's beautiful, she said finally, so different from Philadelphia, everything there is, contained. Buildings and streets and fences. Out here it feels like a person could breathe. Garrett glanced at her, struck by the observation. It echoed his own feelings when he'd first come west at 18, fleeing the crowded tenements of Chicago. That's the appeal for many. Space to make your own way. Is that why you came west, Mr. McAllister? The question was personal, but asked with such genuine curiosity that he found himself answering. Partly, didn't have much waiting for me back east. Figured I had as good a chance as any out here. And has it been what you hoped? He considered the question. It's been, honest, the West doesn't lie to you. You work hard, you might survive, you get careless, you won't. Simple as that. That sounds rather lonely, she observed. Garrett shifted in his saddle. Lonely's safer than the alternative out here. Which is? Depending on others, building something that can be taken away. She studied him with those perceptive hazel eyes. You sound like someone who's lost something important. He turned away, uncomfortable with her insight. We should pick up the pace if we want to reach the ranch by midday. They rode faster after that, conversation limited to practical matters. How much farther would there be water ahead? Was the snow likely to slow their progress? But Willow's observation lingered in Garrett's mind. He had lost something once, a family, a future, a belief that the world operated with any kind of fairness. The frontier hadn't given those things back, but it had offered a different bargain. Survival without attachment, freedom without roots. Until now, it had seemed a fair exchange. The Double Circle Ranch came into view just before noon, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a valley protected by surrounding hills. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and even from a distance they could see the activity of a working cattle operation. It's larger than I imagined, Willow said, a hint of apprehension in her voice. Hampton started with nothing 20 years ago, built it all through grit and good timing. Garrett pointed to various buildings as they approached. Bunkhouse their houses about 15 hands in winter, more in summer. Barns, stables, smithy, cookhouse. Main house is where Mr. Hampton lives with his sister, Miss Eliza. She runs the household. Willow nodded, taking it all in. And you think they might need help? Christmas dinner for 20 men plus guests from neighboring ranches. Miss Eliza's been complaining for weeks about being short-handed. Cook's getting older, and the girl who usually helps is visiting family in Bozeman. As they rode into the yard, several cowboys looked up from their tasks, curiosity evident at the sight of a young woman accompanying Garrett. He ignored their stares, helping Willow dismount before a tall, lean man with graying hair emerged from the main house. McAllister, didn't expect you back so soon. The man's keen eyes moved to Willow. Mr. Hampton. This is Miss Willow Pearson. She was stranded in Silverpine when the stagecoach broke down, looking for temporary work until she can continue to Helena. Hampton studied Willow with an appraising eye. What kind of work are you seeking, Miss Pearson? Willow straightened, meeting his gaze directly. I'm willing to do whatever is needed, sir. I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts if necessary. I'm not afraid of hard work. A hint of approval flickered across Hampton's weathered features. My sister handles the hiring for the house. Come along. Inside, the main house was surprisingly comfortable, rustic but well-appointed, with polished wooden floors and sturdy furniture. A woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun looked up from a ledger as they entered. "Andrew, I was just reviewing the supplies for—" She stopped, noticing Willow. "Oh. I didn't realize we had a visitor. Eliza, this is Miss Pearson. McAllister thinks she might help with the Christmas preparations." Miss Eliza's expression remained neutral as she assessed Willow. "Can you cook, girl?" "Yes, ma'am, though I admit my experience is more with Eastern cuisine than frontier fare." "Can you follow instructions and work quickly?" "I can, ma'am. Have you any references?" Willow hesitated. "No, ma'am, but I'm eager to learn and willing to prove myself." Miss Eliza exchanged a look with her brother. "We're desperate enough, I suppose. Christmas is in 5 days and Mrs. Holloway can't manage alone." She turned back to Willow. "Room and board plus $2 a week. You'll share the small bedroom off the kitchen with Sarah when she returns. Hours are long, work is hard, and I expect absolute propriety at all times. Understood?" Relief flooded Willow's face. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." "McAllister will show you to the kitchen. Mrs. Holloway will get you started immediately." Miss Eliza returned to her ledger, the matter settled. Outside the study, Willow turned to Garrett, eyes bright with gratitude. "Thank you, truly." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her thanks. "It's only temporary. Stage should run again after Christmas." "Even so, you didn't have to help me." "Consider it Christmas charity," he said, leading her toward the kitchen. "Besides, Hampton's a good employer. Just do your work and keep to yourself, and you'll be fine until Helena." In the kitchen, Mrs. Holloway, a round woman with perpetually flushed cheeks, was elbow-deep in bread dough. She looked up with undisguised relief when Garrett explained Willow's presence. "Thank the Lord, I've been praying for help. Girl, can you make a decent pie crust?" "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me before she passed." "Then wash your hands and get started. We need 30 pies before Christmas, and I've barely begun." With Willow settled, Garrett retreated, intent on returning to his regular duties. But as he headed toward the bunkhouse, Hampton called him back. "McAllister, a word." Garrett followed him into the study, where Miss Eliza still worked at her desk. "Where exactly did you find this girl?" Hampton asked once the door closed behind them. "Silver Pine, like I said, the stage broke down." Miss Eliza looked up sharply. "And you just happened to offer her employment out of the goodness of your heart. That's not like you, McAllister." Garrett shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. "She needed work, you needed help," seemed simple enough. "Is she running from something?" Hampton's question was direct. "Or someone?" Garrett hesitated, loyalty warring with practicality. "She's trying to reach Helena." "That's all I know." Hampton exchanged a look with his sister. "Well, we're short-handed enough to take the risk, but I'm holding you responsible for her, McAllister. Any trouble follows her here, it's on your head." "Yes, sir." "And find out what she's really running from," Miss Eliza added. "Pretty young thing like that, traveling alone just before Christmas. There's a story there, and I want to know if it puts this ranch at risk." Garrett nodded, though the task sat uneasily with him. He'd offered Willow help, not surveillance, but Hampton's word was law on the double circle, and he owed the man his livelihood. As he finally made his way to the bunkhouse to change for afternoon work, Garrett wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The frontier was no place for complications, yet he'd just invited one directly into their midst, a complication with honey-blonde hair and secrets in her eyes. The next 3 days established a routine. Garrett rose before dawn, worked with the cattle until dusk, and took his meals in the bunkhouse with the other hands. He caught only glimpses of Willow, hurrying between the cookhouse and main house, arms full of supplies, cheeks flushed from the heat of the kitchen. By all accounts, she had proven herself capable and hardworking, earning grudging approval from Mrs. Holloway and even a rare compliment from Miss Eliza. "Girl has good hands for pastry, Mrs. Holloway announced at supper on the third evening when she brought fresh bread to the bunkhouse. "And doesn't complain, neither, not like that last girl who couldn't handle the work." The cowboys exchanged knowing glances. Several had already attempted to catch Willow's attention, only to be met with polite disinterest. Garrett had watched these interactions from a distance, telling himself his relief at her professional demeanor was merely concern for her employment. On the fourth day, December 23rd, Garrett was repairing a fence line when he spotted Willow walking alone toward the small creek that ran behind the property. Remembering Hampton's instructions to learn more about her, he secured his tools and followed at a discreet distance. She sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, unwrapping a small bundle that proved to be her midday meal. For several minutes, she simply ate in silence, gazing at the water. Then, to Garrett's surprise, she began to speak aloud, her voice carrying in the clear winter air. "I wonder if he's still looking for me," she said, as if continuing a conversation with herself. "Or if he's simply written me off as another disappointment." Willow, always too willful for her own good, her imitation of a stern male voice held a bitterness Garrett hadn't heard from her before. She sighed, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What would you think of me now, Mother, working in a ranch kitchen in the middle of nowhere, running away from a respectable marriage to Mr. Harrington and his wandering hands and business ambitions?" Garrett shifted his weight, accidentally snapping a twig beneath his boot. Willow spun around, rising to her feet in alarm. "Who's there?" He stepped into view, raising his hands slightly. "Just me." "Sorry to startle you." Relief and then suspicion crossed her face. "Were you following me, Mr. McAllister?" "No," he lied, then immediately corrected himself. "Yes, Hampton asked me to keep an eye on you." Her expression hardened. "I see he doesn't trust me." "It's not personal, he's cautious about strangers." Garrett approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mind if I join you?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, resuming her seat on the log. He settled beside her, leaving space between them. "So," he said after an awkward silence, "Mr. Harrington." Color rose in her cheeks. "You heard that?" "Bits and pieces." Enough to gather he was the unwanted fiancé. She stared at the creek. "My father owned, I suppose, since I'm no longer his concern, a shipping company in Philadelphia. Edward Harrington is his business partner, a widower of 50 with political ambitions. Father decided I would make a suitable wife to advance both their interests." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I disagreed." "Seems reasonable to disagree with being treated like a business transaction." "Father didn't see it that way. When I refused, she hesitated. "He said I would comply or be cut off completely. No money, no family connections, no references for employment. When I still refused, he locked me in my room until I came to my senses. The wedding was set for Christmas Day." "How did you get away?" Garrett asked, genuinely curious. A small, proud smile touched her lips. "I climbed out the window using bedsheets tied together, like in a novel. Thankfully, my room was only on the second floor. I had saved some money from my allowance, enough for a train ticket west and a little extra. I left that night." "Brave," he said simply, "or foolish," she countered. "I had no real plan beyond get as far away as possible. Helena seemed far enough, and I'd read it was growing with opportunities for women." "It is," Garrett confirmed. "But it's also rough, not like eastern cities." "Nowhere is like Philadelphia," she said with surprising vehemence. "The constraints, the expectations, the endless rules about what a proper young lady can and cannot do. At least here no one expects me to be anything but what I am, a woman willing to work." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "What about you, Mr. McAllister? What brought you west?" The direct question caught him off guard. Most people on the frontier didn't pry into others' pasts. Similar reasons, wanting something different. "Different from what?" He hesitated, then decided fair exchange was reasonable. "Chicago tenements. Father died in a factory accident when I was 16. Mother followed a year later, consumption. I worked the stockyards until I couldn't stand the stench and the city walls closing in anymore. Hopped a train west when I was 18, found work as a ranch hand. Been doing it ever since. No family left back east. A sister married with children in Cincinnati. We write occasionally." He shrugged. "Better for her that way. Her husband's respectable, wouldn't do to have a cowboy brother visiting too often." Willow studied him. "And that's why you believe it's safer not to depend on others, because you've lost those you did depend on." The insight struck too close to the bone. Garrett stood abruptly. "You should head back. Mrs. Holloway will be looking for you." Willow rose more slowly. "I apologize if I overstepped." "You didn't," he said, softening his tone. "It's just not a subject I discuss often." "Or ever, I imagine." Her smile held no judgment. "Thank you for sharing even that much with me. It helps to know I'm not the only one starting over." They walked back toward the ranch buildings in silence, but it was a comfortable one, as if some understanding had been reached. At the kitchen door she paused. "Will you tell Mr. Hampton about my situation?" Garrett considered the question. "I'll tell him enough to satisfy his concerns, that you're running from an unwanted marriage, not the law. He doesn't need the details." "Thank you," she hesitated, then added, "for everything." As she disappeared into the kitchen, Garrett found himself standing there longer than necessary, replaying their conversation. Willow Pearson was becoming dangerously easy to talk to, and that realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Christmas Eve arrived with a festive air despite the isolated location. The bunkhouse had been decorated with pine boughs, the main house boasted actual candles on a small tree in the parlor, and the smell of baking permeated the entire ranch. Even the usually stern Miss Eliza seemed affected by the holiday spirit, distributing small packages to each ranch hand after the midday meal, new gloves for some, scarves for others, practical gifts that were nonetheless appreciated. Garrett received a new hunting knife with a bone handle, which he accepted with genuine thanks. He had his own gift for Hampton, a hand-carved pipe he'd worked on for weeks, but nothing for anyone else. He hadn't anticipated needing a gift for Willow, which now seemed an oversight. Late that afternoon, as dusk approached, Garrett was returning from the north pasture when he noticed unusual activity in the ranch yard. Several men on horseback were speaking with Hampton, their posture suggesting urgency rather than social calling. As he approached, he recognized Sheriff Ellis among them. "McAllister," Hampton called, waving him over. "These men are looking for a young woman, blonde, early 20s, traveled west by train about a week ago." Garrett's stomach tightened as he dismounted. "Sir." Ellis nodded in greeting. "McAllister, this is Mr. Pearson and his associate Mr. Harrington from Philadelphia. They're searching for Mr. Pearson's daughter, who left home without permission. They have reason to believe she passed through Silverpine recently." Standing before him were two well-dressed Eastern men who looked distinctly out of place in the Montana wilderness. The older man, Pearson, presumably had the same honey-blonde hair as Willow, though shot through with gray. His companion, a florid-faced man with cold eyes, studied Garrett with obvious disdain. "We've come a long way, Mr. Hampton," Pearson said, his accent distinctly Eastern. "My daughter is young and impulsive. I fear she may have been taken advantage of by unsavory characters promising her adventure in the West. Or she might simply have decided to seek employment elsewhere," Garrett said before he could stop himself. Pearson's gaze snapped to him. "And you are?" "Garrett McAllister. I work for Mr. Hampton." "I see, and do you make it a habit to insert yourself into matters that don't concern you, Mr. McAllister?" Hampton cleared his throat. "McAllister was in Silverpine a few days ago. If he saw something relevant to your search, we'd all like to hear it." The pressure of 4 pairs of eyes made Garrett acutely aware of the delicate position he occupied. His loyalty to Hampton demanded honesty, but something in him rebelled at the thought of delivering Willow back to these men, especially Harrington, whose gaze held a possessive quality that made Garrett's skin crawl. "I was in town on the night the stagecoach broke down," he said carefully. "Several passengers were stranded, looking for accommodations. I didn't notice anyone matching your daughter's description specifically." It wasn't quite a lie. He hadn't known she was Willow Pearson when he first saw her. Harrington's eyes narrowed. Sheriff Ellis said a young woman matching Willow's description was seen in the saloon that night, asking about lodging. "The saloon serves as a general meeting place in small towns, Mr. Harrington," Ellis explained. "Nothing improper about it, especially during a storm." "And was this young woman traveling alone?" Pearson pressed. "I couldn't say, sir. As I mentioned, there were several passengers stranded that night." Garrett maintained a neutral expression despite the tension building in his chest. Hampton studied him for a moment before turning back to their visitors. "Gentlemen, you're welcome to stay the night. We're preparing for Christmas dinner tomorrow, so accommodations are simple, but better than riding back to town in the dark." "Thank you, but no," Pearson said stiffly. "We'll continue our inquiries in town. If the stage was headed west, Helena is the logical destination. We'll proceed there in the morning." As they prepared to leave, Harrington approached Garrett directly. "If you do happen to recall anything about a young blonde woman, Mr. McAllister, there would be a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." The implication that his silence could be bought stoked a slow-burning anger in Garrett's chest. I'm sure any father would be eager to reunite with his daughter, Mr. Harrington, especially at Christmas. Indeed, Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes, though in this case I have an even greater interest. The young lady in question is my fiancée. After they departed, Hampton turned to Garrett with a knowing expression. Want to tell me what that was really about? Garrett hesitated, then decided honesty was his only option. Miss Pearson is the woman I brought here from Silverpine. She's running from an arranged marriage to that man. Hampton sighed heavily. I suspected as much when Ellis described her. Does Eliza know? No, sir, I only told her and Mrs. Holloway that Miss Pearson was traveling to Helena for employment. Well, this complicates matters considerably. Hampton rubbed his beard thoughtfully. By rights, I should inform them she's here. She's barely more than a girl, and that's her father searching for her. With all due respect, sir, she's 19. Old enough to decide her own future. Garrett found himself speaking more passionately than he'd intended, and if you'd seen the way that man looked at her. I saw it well enough just now, Hampton interrupted. Looked at her like a prize horse he'd paid for but hadn't yet broken to saddle. He sighed again. I don't approve of deception, McAllister, but I like the idea of sending that girl off with those men even less, especially on Christmas Eve. What will you do, sir? Nothing tonight. They're heading back to town and they won't leave for Helena until morning at the earliest. Hampton fixed him with a stern look, but she needs to know they're looking for her, and she needs to decide what she wants to do. Her choices may be limited, but they're still hers to make. Garrett nodded, relieved. I'll tell her. See that you do, and McAllister, Hampton's expression softened slightly, you've shown good judgment with this girl so far. I trust you'll continue to do so. The implication was clear. Whatever happened next, Garrett would be responsible for the consequences. The weight of that trust settled uncomfortably on his shoulders as he went in search of Willow. He found her in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare vegetables for the following day's feast. Her face was flushed from the heat of the stove, a few strands of honey-blonde hair escaping her cap to curl against her neck. She looked up as he entered, a smile starting to form until she saw his expression. Mr. McAllister, is something wrong? Mrs. Holloway glanced between them, then tactfully excused herself to check on something in the pantry. Your father is in Silverpine, Garrett said without preamble. With Mr. Harrington, they're looking for you. The blood drained from Willow's face. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. How? How did they find me? Train records, I imagine. They knew you were headed west. He moved closer, lowering his voice. They were just here speaking with Hampton. I didn't tell them you were here, and neither did he. But they're planning to continue to Helena tomorrow. Her breathing quickened, panic evident in her eyes. I need to leave tonight. If they're going to Helena, I should go south or north, anywhere they won't look. Willow, he placed a hand on her arm, the first time he'd used her given name or touched her directly. Think carefully. It's Christmas Eve, the weather is uncertain, and you have limited funds. Running blindly could be more dangerous than staying put. What choice do I have? If they find me, my father will force me to return with them. Or worse, the wedding could happen right here in Montana territory. There are ministers in Helena, aren't there? Garrett nodded grimly. The scenario was entirely possible, especially with a father determined to have his way and a fiancée eager to claim his prize. There's another option. Stay here at least through Christmas. Hampton knows your situation now and seems inclined to let you make your own decision. Your father and Harrington are heading to Helena. They might pass through on their return journey, but that gives us time. Time for what? To figure out a more permanent solution, one that doesn't involve you freezing to death in the wilderness on Christmas Eve. She studied his face. Why are you helping me, Mr. McAllister? You made it clear when we met that you prefer to avoid complications. I am certainly that. It was a fair question, one he'd asked himself repeatedly over the past days. Let's just say I recognize the look of someone who needs a second chance. I had help when I came west. Seems only fair to pass that on. She didn't appear entirely convinced by his explanation, but the immediate panic had faded from her eyes. What if they return before Christmas is over? What if they find out I'm here? Then we'll deal with it, he said with more confidence than he felt. But for now, you're safe. Hampton won't betray your presence, and neither will I. After a moment she nodded. "All right, I'll stay through Christmas, but I need to be ready to leave at a moment's notice." "Fair enough," he hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry they found you. I know you were hoping for a clean break." "There are no clean breaks from men like my father," she said with sudden bitterness. "Only escapes that lead to more running." She straightened her apron, visibly composing herself. "I should return to my duties. Mrs. Holloway will wonder what's keeping me." As if on cue, the older woman emerged from the pantry. "Everything all right, dear?" "Yes, Mrs. Holloway," Mr. McAllister was just wishing us a Merry Christmas. Garrett took the hint. "Indeed, Merry Christmas to you both. I'll leave you to your preparations." Outside, the sky had darkened to deep twilight, stars beginning to appear in the clear December night. Garrett stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp air and considering the events of the day. He'd come west to avoid entanglements, to live by the simple code of work and solitude that the frontier seemed to demand. Yet here he was, deeply entangled in Willow Pearson's problems, risking his position and Hampton's trust for a woman he'd known less than a week. The most troubling part was that, given the choice again, he knew he would make the same decision. Something about Willow had breached the careful wall he'd built around himself. Her courage, her determination, or perhaps simply the fact that, like him, she was trying to outrun a past that refused to stay buried. As he walked toward the bunkhouse, Garrett realized with a start that he no longer saw helping Willow as Christmas charity. Somewhere in the past few days, it had become personal. And that realization was more unsettling than any complication he could imagine. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the ranch blanketed in a fresh dusting of snow that glittered in the early light. Despite the holiday, work continued. Animals needed tending regardless of the date, but the atmosphere was lighter, the tasks completed with cheerful efficiency in anticipation of the afternoon feast. Garrett found himself distracted, constantly scanning the horizon for approaching riders while trying to appear normal to his fellow ranch hands. He'd slept poorly, his dreams filled with images of Willow being dragged away by shadowy figures while he stood frozen, unable to intervene. By midday, the ranch was filled with delicious aromas as the Christmas dinner neared completion. Several families from neighboring homesteads arrived, bearing additional dishes and small gifts. The main house buzzed with activity as tables were arranged in the largest room to accommodate everyone. Garrett cleaned up as best he could and joined the other ranch hands filing into the house. The room had been transformed, pine boughs and red ribbons adorned the walls, candles glowed on every surface, and the tables groaned under the weight of the feast. Hampton sat at the head of the main table, with Miss Eliza at the other end. The ranch hands, neighboring families, and a few local dignitaries filled the remaining seats. Willow and Mrs. Holloway were still bustling between the kitchen and dining room, bringing out the last dishes. Garrett caught Willow's eye as she set down a platter of roast beef. She offered a small smile but quickly looked away, the worry evident in her posture despite her efforts to appear calm. When all were seated, Hampton stood for the blessing. As he spoke of gratitude for the year's bounty and the community gathered to share it, Garrett found his gaze drawn again to Willow, now seated at a small side table with Mrs. Holloway and the housekeeper from a neighboring ranch. The simple blue dress she wore complemented her coloring, and she'd arranged her honey-blonde hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical braid. Despite the shadows beneath her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as he had, she was undeniably beautiful. The meal proceeded with the boisterous goodwill typical of such gatherings. Stories were shared, jokes told, and generous amounts of food consumed. Garrett participated minimally, his attention divided between his plate and the window where the road to Silverpine was visible in the distance. Halfway through the meal, Hampton leaned over. "McAllister, you look like you're expecting an Indian attack. Try to relax or you'll draw more attention than you're avoiding." Garrett nodded, making a conscious effort to appear more at ease. "Sorry, sir. Just concerned about our visitors from yesterday. I've posted Jenkins and Rodriguez on rotation watching the road. If anyone approaches, we'll have warning." Hampton's expression softened slightly. "How is she holding up?" "Scared but determined. She doesn't want to cause trouble for the ranch." Hampton glanced toward Willow. "She's a good worker. Eliza says she has refined manners but isn't afraid to get her hands dirty." "That's rare in a girl with her upbringing." Before Garrett could respond, Miss Eliza called for attention. "As is our tradition, we'll now have some music before dessert is served. Mrs. Holloway has prepared her famous Christmas pudding, which will be brought out momentarily." Several of the guests had brought instruments. a fiddle, a harmonica, and even a small portable organ that was set up in the corner. The music began with traditional carols, voices joining in with varying degrees of skill but universal enthusiasm. During a pause between songs, the door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Jenkins, one of the hands who had been watching the road. "Riders approaching, Mr. Hampton. Looks like the sheriff and those eastern gents from yesterday." The room fell silent. Hampton rose immediately. "How far out?" "10 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast." Garrett was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, his eyes finding Willow across the room. She had gone pale, one hand clutching the back of a chair. Hampton took charge quickly. "Eliza, take Miss Pearson to your room. Jenkins, Rodriguez, meet our visitors in the yard. Be polite, but don't invite them in immediately. McAllister with me." As the room erupted in whispers, Garrett crossed to Willow. "Go with Miss Eliza. I'll come for you when it's safe." "They found me," she whispered, the fear in her eyes giving way to resignation. "I knew they would." "They haven't found you yet," he said firmly, "and they won't take you anywhere against your will, I promise." Something in his tone must have convinced her, for she nodded once before following Miss Eliza from the room. Garrett turned to find Hampton watching him with an unreadable expression. "I hope you know what you're doing, McAllister," he said quietly. "Interfering between a father and daughter is dangerous territory, even out here." "Yes, sir." "But so is forcing a woman to marry against her will." Hampton sighed. "Let's see what they want before we start planning a rescue mission, shall we?" They stepped onto the porch just as Sheriff Ellis and the two Easterners rode into the yard. The holiday festivities had spilled outside, with several ranch hands engaged in an impromptu target shooting contest to one side, providing an unexpectedly intimidating backdrop to the visitors' arrival. "Sheriff," Hampton called. "Didn't expect to see you on Christmas Day." Ellis dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to intrude on your celebration, Hampton. Mr. Pearson here received information in town that his daughter might be here after all." Pearson and Harrington dismounted as well, the former stepping forward with barely concealed impatience. "Mr. Hampton, I apologize for the interruption, but this is a matter of some urgency. My daughter has been missing for over a week, and we have reason to believe she is here." "That's quite an accusation," Hampton replied evenly. "May I ask what led you to this conclusion?" "The stagecoach driver recalled a young woman matching my daughter's description being assisted by one of your men." Pearson's gaze shifted to Garrett. "This man, in fact, he claimed not to remember her yesterday, which struck me as suspicious." Garrett kept his expression neutral despite the surge of anger at the driver's loose tongue. Money had likely changed hands to produce that information. Harrington stepped forward, his manner more aggressive. "We've wasted enough time with pleasantries. Is Willow Pearson here or not?" Hampton's voice hardened. "Mr. Harrington, you're a guest on my property, uninvited at that. I suggest you moderate your tone." "Or what?" Harrington's hand moved to his coat, where the outline of a pistol was visible. "This is a family matter and we have the law on our side. Sheriff, isn't that right?" Ellis looked distinctly uncomfortable. "As I explained on the ride over, sir, Montana Territory isn't Philadelphia. A young woman of 19 has considerable legal freedom out here, especially regarding marriage." "She is my daughter," Pearson insisted, "and Mr. Harrington's fiancée by formal agreement." "Formal agreement between whom?" Garrett couldn't contain himself any longer. "Between you and Mr. Harrington. Did Miss Pearson have any say in this arrangement?" Pearson's face flushed with anger. "You dare question me about my own daughter? Who are you to interfere in matters beyond your station?" "That's enough," Hampton's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Pearson, Mr. Harrington, I understand your concern. If Miss Pearson is here, perhaps we should ask her directly what she wishes." Before either man could respond, the door opened behind them and Willow stepped onto the porch. She had evidently slipped away from Miss Eliza, her expression a mixture of fear and determination as she faced her father. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Hampton, I'm here." Garrett moved instinctively to her side, positioned slightly in front of her in a protective stance that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Willow," Pearson's voice softened though his eyes remained hard. "You've led us on quite a chase, young lady. It's time to come home." "I'm not going back, father." Her voice trembled slightly but held firm. "Not to Philadelphia, and certainly not to a marriage I never agreed to." This is absurd, Harrington interjected. She's clearly been influenced by, he gestured dismissively at Garrett, local entanglements. The wedding has been arranged, guests invited, contracts signed. Contracts, Willow's voice rose in indignation. Is that what I am to you, a business transaction? You are my daughter, Pearson said sternly, and you will do as I say. Your mother would be ashamed of this behavior. The mention of her mother struck Willow like a physical blow. Don't you dare speak of her. She would never have forced me into marriage with a man 3 times my age for business connections. Harrington's face darkened with anger. I've been patient with your childish rebellion, Willow, but my patience is at an end. You are my fiancé and you will return with us now. He moved toward her, hand outstretched to grab her arm. Garrett stepped fully between them, his stance unmistakably threatening despite his lack of a weapon. Touch her and it will be the last thing you do, he said quietly. The yard had gone silent, the holiday festivities forgotten as ranch hands and guests alike watched the confrontation unfold. Several cowboys had moved closer, their hands near their weapons, loyalty to Hampton and Garrett evident in their positioning. Sheriff, Pearson appealed, surely you won't allow this cowboy to interfere in a family matter. Ellis removed his hat, running a hand through his gray hair. Mr. Pearson, as I've explained, the law out here is different. If your daughter states clearly that she doesn't wish to return with you, I have no authority to force her. This is outrageous. Harrington's hand moved to his coat again, this time drawing his pistol. She is coming with us one way or another. In an instant, 6 cowboys had weapons trained on him, including Rodriguez, who had silently positioned himself behind the Eastern men during the exchange. I wouldn't, Hampton said calmly. My men are quite protective of those they consider their own, and they rarely miss at this range. Harrington hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered. Pearson placed a restraining hand on his arm. Put it away, Edward, this isn't how we handle this. He turned to Willow, his expression hardening. Very well, if this is your choice, so be it, but understand what it means. You are no longer my daughter, no longer a Pearson. You will receive nothing from me, no money, no support, no references. You have chosen to be nothing, and nothing is what you shall have. Willow flinched at each pronouncement, but her voice was steady when she replied, I would rather be nothing and free than a Pearson and caged. For a moment, something like regret flashed across her father's face before it settled back into stern disapproval. Come, Edward, there's nothing more to be done here. Harrington holstered his weapon reluctantly, his cold eyes fixed on Garrett. This isn't over, cowboy. A man doesn't forget who stole what's rightfully his. She was never yours to begin with, Garrett replied evenly. That was your first mistake. As the 2 men mounted their horses, Sheriff Ellis lingered. I'm sorry about this, Hampton. Didn't expect it to get so tense. Not your fault, Ellis. Some men don't understand the meaning of no until they're looking down the barrel of a gun. Hampton glanced at Willow. The girl's welcome to stay here as long as she needs. We could use the help, and she's proven herself capable. Ellis nodded, then turned to Willow. Miss, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. A woman should choose her own path out here. It's one of the few advantages the frontier offers. After they departed, the yard remained silent for a long moment before Hampton cleared his throat. Well, I believe we were in the middle of Christmas dinner. Let's continue, shall we? Mrs. Holloway's pudding won't wait forever. As the crowd began to disperse, Willow remained frozen on the porch, her face pale with the aftermath of confrontation. Garrett touched her arm gently. Are you all right? She shook her head slightly. I don't know, I just lost everything. My family, my name, my future. No, he said firmly, you just claimed them for yourself. Your own name, your own future, on your own terms. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. I've never been entirely on my own before, it's terrifying. You're not on your own, he said before he could reconsider the implications. You have a place here for as long as you want it. Because Mr. Hampton feels sorry for me. Because you've earned it and because, he hesitated, then decided that if she could face down her father and former life, he could face this truth. And because I care what happens to you, Willow, more than I should, probably. Something shifted in her expression, surprise giving way to a tentative warmth. I care what happens to you too, Garrett. Even though caring for anyone out here seems like a risk neither of us is prepared to take. Maybe some risks are worth taking, he said quietly, Maybe the frontier doesn't have to mean being alone. The door opened behind them as Miss Eliza appeared, looking exasperated. There you are, girl. Slipped away from me like a shadow. Come inside, both of you. It's still Christmas and we have pudding to serve. Willow smiled, the first genuine smile Garrett had seen from her all day. Yes, Miss Eliza. Right away. As they followed her inside, Willow's hand found Garrett's, their fingers intertwining briefly before they reached the crowded dining room. The simple touch conveyed what words couldn't yet, that something had changed between them, a possibility neither had anticipated when she stumbled into the Silverpine Saloon days ago. Christmas dinner resumed with renewed festivity, the brief confrontation adding a certain excitement to the proceedings rather than dampening them. Several of the ranch hands made a point of welcoming Willow more formally, now that her status as a permanent addition seemed established. Miss Eliza, to everyone's surprise, announced that Willow would be taking on additional responsibilities as her assistant, with a corresponding increase in wages. Girl has a head for figures, she explained to her brother. Caught an error in the supply ledgers that would have cost us $20. Throughout the remainder of the day, Garrett found his gaze continually drawn to Willow as she moved among the guests, serving pudding and participating in the celebration with growing confidence. The shadow of her confrontation with her father lingered in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a newfound certainty, perhaps, or the first fragile roots of belonging. As evening fell and the gathering began to disperse, Hampton pulled Garrett aside. You did right by that girl today, McAllister. Not every man would have stood between her and her father, especially one with money and influence. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your support. Hampton studied him for a moment. Just be clear about your intentions going forward. She's vulnerable right now, and you've positioned yourself as her protector. That comes with responsibility. I understand, sir. Do you? Because from where I stand, it looks like you might be developing feelings that go beyond protection. Garrett didn't deny it. Would that be a problem, sir? Not for me. But it might be for you, given your general philosophy about attachments and the frontier. Hampton's expression softened. Just be sure, McAllister, that girl's had enough uncertainty in her life. With that advice lingering in his mind, Garrett found Willow later that evening as she sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl and gazing at the stars that spangled the clear winter sky. Mind some company? He asked, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. She smiled, making room for him on the step. Not at all, what's that? Christmas gift, nothing fancy. He handed it to her awkwardly. Didn't have time to get something proper. She unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden carving of a horse, simply but skillfully made. Did you make this? He nodded, started it last night, finished it this morning. Like I said, nothing fancy. It's beautiful, she said softly, running her fingers over the smooth lines. I've never received a gift that someone made specifically for me. Seems unlikely given your background. Oh, I received presents. Expensive ones chosen by my father's secretary or the housekeeper, but never something made by hand with thought behind it. She looked up at him, her eyes bright in the starlight. Thank you, Garrett. The sound of his given name on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through him. You're welcome, Willow. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the distant conversation from the bunkhouse and the occasional stamp of horses in the nearby corral. What happens now? She asked finally, now that I've officially burned my bridges to Philadelphia. Whatever you want to happen, he said. Hampton's offering you a permanent position. You could stay, build a life here. And if here is where I want to be? The question held layers of meaning that Garrett couldn't ignore. Then here is where you'll stay. The ranch is a good place, good people. And will you stay too? He hesitated, the old instinct to avoid commitment warring with the new desire to explore whatever was growing between them. I've been here 3 years, longest I've stayed anywhere since Chicago. Reckon I could stay a while longer. Willow turned to face him more directly. Garrett, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you help me because you felt sorry for me? Was it just Christmas charity like you said? At first maybe, he admitted, but not anymore, not for a while now. Then what is it? Why stand between me and my father, risk your position here? The moment demanded honesty, however uncomfortable. Because in the week I've known you, Willow Pearson, you've made me question everything I thought I knew about surviving out here. About what it means to be alone, to be safe. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. I came west believing the frontier was no place for attachment, that caring for someone was just opening yourself to loss. And now I'm thinking maybe the frontier is exactly where people need connections most. Where they matter most. He reached out cautiously, taking her hand in his. I don't know what this is between us. It's happened faster than makes any kind of sense, but I'd like to find out if you would. Her fingers tightened around his. I'd like that too, very much. The admission hung between them, fragile but real. Garrett found himself leaning forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with a surprising intensity. When they finally pulled apart, both somewhat breathless, Willow smiled. For a man who claims to prefer solitude, you're surprisingly good at that. He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Been a while, might need practice. I think that could be arranged, she said, her eyes sparkling with a playfulness he hadn't seen before. Then her expression grew more serious. I don't know what the future holds, Garrett. I've never been on my own before, never had to make my own way. I'll make mistakes. So will I. Been making them most of my life. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But maybe we figure it out together, day by day. She leaned into his touch. I'd like that. A chance to discover who I am when I'm not defined by my father's expectations. A chance to see if whatever this is between us can grow into something real. It already feels pretty real to me, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed. It does. Above them, the stars continued their silent procession across the Montana sky, indifferent to the small human drama unfolding below. But to Garrett McAllister, who had spent years believing the frontier demanded isolation as the price of survival, the night felt transformed, not by the holiday or the recent confrontation, but by the simple truth that he was no longer facing the wilderness alone. And as Willow's head came to rest against his shoulder, her hand still clasped in his, he realized that the heart he'd thought safely armored against attachment had been quietly, irrevocably claimed by a woman who had run from her father days before Christmas and found not just protection, but a future neither of them had dared imagine.